Top 5 time. 555. Hello everybody, thank you for joining me today. I do truly appreciate it. And today I want to talk about the top 5 books, my top 5 favorite books that I read in the year 2024. As I speak at the moment, it is January 2nd of 2025. And I read 60 books, 60, 50, 59. I read 59 books in 2024. I'm not bragging because so many people on the internet read 300 books last year. But for me, 59 books is the most books I've read in a year. So, no, I'm just kidding. However, I've looked back at the stuff I read, and as difficult as painful, it's actually not painful to look back at the stuff I read. It's a beautiful thing. But trying to figure out what are my top 5 favorite books that I read. They're not books that were all published in 2024. They're books that I read in 2024. Some are much older than that. Trying to figure out what are my top 5 favorites because there's some really good ones I left out. But then to tell you which one was my favorite. That's also painful. Some great authors and some great books that aren't my favorite. Lots of favorites, but only a favorite. And it's tough. And I hate doing that stuff because I hate minimizing the love, the importance, the greatness of things. But there can only be one. And so it is. So the top 5 favorite books that I read, and there's some rules in here, and I might break the rules. Who knows? I made the rules up, so I'll break them if I so choose. I don't want to say that a book that's a part of a series, other than the first book. The first book of a series would qualify if I thought it was the greatest. But book 3, 4, 9 in a series that I love a lot that I read in 2024, I'm not going to put it on the list because I read books in multiple series and I just chose not to do that unless it's the first book of a series that didn't qualify. Also, I don't want to put in multiple books by the same author. I think about people making lists and they're a Stephen King lover and they're going to say the 5 best books I read in 2024 were all Stephen King books. And that's not the case for me. But I don't want it to be something like that because I do have my favorite authors as well. Some of them are represented on this list and some are not. Anyway, there are some rules like that. And if I think of any more, I'll tell you. However, I'm going to start with the first book in this 5-book set. I don't want to say it's the 5th best book I read, but it's a great one. And we'll say coming in at number 5 is Pierre Boulle, Planet of the Apes. And this is the Folio Society version of the book. It's illustrated and it looks so good. So good. This is not a book show and tell book, but it is illustrated and I'm flipping through and not seeing any illustrations. There are 5 or 6 in here, I think, but there's one. Cover your eyes, darling. Of course, I go right to that one. But The Planet of the Apes is a movie that I love, and I got 2 boys. One is 14 and one is 12. And they both love the 1968 Planet of the Apes starring Charlton Heston as well. I could go put that movie on right now in the living room. Say, hey, y'all want to watch the Planet of the Apes? And I'm going to have 2 boys wander into the living room and sit down and watch the movie with me. It's a beautiful thing. I'd never read the book. And I did, figuring I'm going to be disappointed. And guess what? I was not. I really loved this book by Pierre Boulle. It was originally written in French, I'm taken to understand, so I read an English translation, whichever one the Folio Society chose. And I loved many things about it. I loved that it has a twist, a couple of twists, and I don't know them. That's neat. It's like watching the movie again for the first time and not knowing how it ends, which was the problem. I'd seen the end of the movie long before I'd seen the movie. It's become an iconic image. Charlton Heston staring up at a portion of the Statue of Liberty and cursing him for damning them all to hell and stuff for what they did, blowing it all up. Spoiler alert. The book is much different. It's different. It's not the same thing. Not the same thing at all. But I do love this book, and I loved it in many different ways. I love this perspective of the characters. I love the fact that I felt like the apes on the planet of the apes weren't quite so awful as the apes in the movie. Anyway, I really loved this book. It was well worth the read. One of the things that I worry about, and I had worried about a lot over the past, is that if I have seen a movie over and over and I go read the book, I'm just spending a lot of time reading a story that I've already watched over and over. And this is an example of that is not the case. Similar, but it's not the same. So Pierre Boulle, to me, knocked it out of the park with Planet of the Apes, and well deserving all of the movie accolades and such as that's come from this book. But this book is fabulous. I strongly recommend that you read it if you haven't already. Strong recommend. Now I've still got to read Bridge Over the River Kwai, a movie that I love, The Bridge on the River Kwai, and I haven't read Pierre Boulle's Bridge Over the River Kwai. I need to read that book still. It's on the list, and maybe I'll get that on the top 5 of 2025. But the next one, number 4 in my top 5 favorite books that I read in the year 2024. Go figure, first time ever, a movie novelization made my list of the 5 best books that I've ever read in a year. And I think it is well deserved. To say this was one of my favorite books that I read last year, 2024, would be an understatement. This book blew my mind. It blew my socks off. This is a novelization by Randall, Frakes, and Bill Wisher, based on the screenplay by James Cameron with Gale and Hurd. So this isn't a book that a movie's based on. This is a book based on a screenplay. And I happen to collect and enjoy movie novelizations for movies that I dig. And this was no doubt a movie that I dig. And reading this novelization was a fabulous experience. As a fan of the movie, this novelization was better than the movie. And it made the movie better when I watched the movie again after reading this novelization. The exposition, the explanations, the character development, all of that stuff made this book so great, while still keeping the flow of the story, while still keeping me engaged throughout. At no time did I want to flip pages and skip on past the explanation of how Bunky became called Bunky, or how the guy that owned the store, that the gun store that the Terminator robbed. Hey, you can't do that. Wrong. How the owner got the store. All of these things, all of the stuff. Sarah Connor's life before Kyle Reese shows up and the Terminator shows up. All of this stuff really helps to make this story better. Understanding the characters better while still telling a thrilling, entertaining story. Making all the main characters better and making all of the minor characters better. Making the story better. So this, the best novelization of a movie that I've ever read. And one of the best books that I read in 2024. The Terminator, I strongly recommend it. Strongly recommend it. That's a great book on its own right. Forget about the movie. A great book in its own right. So, book number 3, book number 4, book number 3, 2, and 1 are very painful for me because this is where the the gritty, the nitty gritty, where it gets very difficult. And as we speak, I'm moving books around because I'm feeling like a waffle, feeling a little bit of a flip-flopper. I should be a politician. I feel flippity-floppitish. But this is a book by one of my absolute favorite authors, and I still think it may be his best book. It's not my favorite book that he wrote. While I love it, and it's one of my favorite books that he wrote, there's another one that is special to me in other ways. And the author is Philip Fracassi. That book is probably A Child Alone with Strangers, and the other one is called Boys in the Valley. Both have a main character that is dear to my heart, probably because I'm a father of boys, and so these boys being the lead characters, I have compassion and empathy and love for the character. Probably that's why they're my favorites. But in the year 2024, I read, whoops, I messed it all up. That is The Third Rule of Time Travel by Philip Fracassi. And this is Philip Fracassi's, as far as I know, first foray into science fiction. He's written horror, he's written other stuff. This is science fiction, and this is flippin' fabulous. It is Third Rule of Time Travel, or Tim 3 Travel. Thank you, Philip. Naming the book after me, Tim 3. But this is a time travel book, as you can see by the title. But it's time travel like you've never seen it or heard it told before. The main character is this lady who is a widow now. Her and her husband, I don't know words very well. She and her husband were partners on trying to develop a time travel method. They need Boulle. So a big time investor, owner of a company that invests in scientific things, bought their research, bought their intellectual property, and hired them to continue to develop this machine that helps one travel back in time. There are 3 rules, and the rules are pretty simple, but they're pretty strict, and I won't get into each of the 3 rules, but, or will I? How about this? Let's find it. I can flip through here, and this tells me about the 3 rules if I can find it quick enough. What are the 3 rules right here? Rule number 1, travel can occur only at a destination point during the previous lifetime of the traveler. These destination points are random. Rule number 2, the traveler has only enough energy to maintain contact with the arrival world for approximately 90 seconds. And rule number 3, the traveler has no ability to interact with the world they have traveled to. So the time travel in the third rule of time travel is, like I said, different than you don't get in a car or a spaceship looking sort of a thing and you move and you go back into time or forward into time. Works differently. In essence, you're downloading all of your stuff into a computer and it's sending that file through a wormhole into what we think is a random point in your past, and you can essentially relive it without controlling it. So your body's doing what it's supposed to do, what it did. The events around you are happening the way they did, and you get to live 90 seconds of your past. But it's random, and the goal is to be able to control it. See, it'd be kind of neat to go back and relive a 90-second clips in my life, my past, if I get to choose them. There are other 90-second clips that I would rather not. I'll pass. I'll skip it if I have the choice. So they want to fix that. But it's a book, and things don't go as you expect. So The Third Rule of Time Travel is a fabulous book by Philip Fracassi, one of my favorite authors walking God's green earth. I strongly recommend you read Philip Fracassi's stuff, all of it, any of it. But the 3 that I just mentioned are great ones. Also, Serafina is another historical fiction with horror elements as well. So the third rule of time travel would be number 3, and it's tough. It's so neck and neck. So neck and neck. But anyway, I've made my commitment, and I might as well just stick with it. Philip Fracassi is one of my favorite authors who ever lived. Number 2. And this one was tough as well. Not only where it belongs between number 2 and number 3, because I love the other book so much, but because I read a lot of stuff. I read some things by this author in 2024, and it was really tough to choose this one over another one. This one is SuperNOIRtural Tales by an author named Ian Rogers. And this is an author that in 2023 I didn't know existed. Probably halfway through 2024 I didn't know he existed. Earthling Publications has a Halloween series, a limited edition Halloween series book, and they'll typically pick a relatively unknown author. They'll pick a horror book that hasn't been published yet. This is usually the way it goes. And they'll make a limited edition of it. It'll be part of their Halloween series. Maybe 60, 70 bucks, something like that. Signed, numbered edition, limited to something like 500 copies. And I'm a fan of the series. I'm a fan of the publisher, and I'm a fan of the owner, Paul Miller. So when he's got a new Halloween edition each year coming out, I don't know the author. It's happened 4 times in a row now. I don't know the author, but I buy the book. And so Ian Rogers was chosen for a book called Family, a haunted house type of story, and I read it and loved it. And I went on to read more from Ian Rogers, and I loved every one of these books that I've read, from Family to Grey to SuperNOIRtural Tales to Sycamore. Did I read anything else? That'll just about cover it. I love them all. But I chose this one for a couple of reasons. This is 5 stories, short stories or novelettes, from what he calls the Black Lands. And there is a detective, a private investigator, Philip Marlowe, Magnum PI, Spencer, a private investigator, Matthew Scudder, who lives in a world, basically a modern day world. He lives in Toronto, Canada. And he lives in a world where there are supernatural things happening. There are these portals that started in the Bermuda Triangle. Remember a long time ago, all these planes and ships were disappearing? Well, these portals to the Black Lands are what caused it. Problem is, they just keep opening up randomly all over the place, and they don't go away. But when these portals open up, this is a door to another dimension. And everything in that other dimension is not good for human occupancy in any way whatsoever. So these portals open up, these doors open up. You can't see them. So you may just be walking and boom, you're in a place called the Black Lands, where there are monsters, there are vampires and shapeshifters and black-eyed kids and great big trees that will move around and kill you. All sorts of things in the Black Lands. Felix Wren is a private detective who is getting divorced in the very first story in this book. This is 5 stories. He's getting divorced, and he's at a restaurant with his soon-to-be ex-wife. And a waiter just starts biting people's necks and sucking their blood. So now Felix Wren has been catapulted into supernatural investigation. He's got to figure out what's going on. What is this stuff? Because he has no client in that case. But anyway, these are a set of stories where each one he gets dragged into some sort of a case where he has to deal with the product of the Black Lands. People that go through the portals, the doors, either they don't come back or they come back different than they went in. The things that come through, the beasts, the monsters, they're all bad for us. All of them. But this is a series of stories, and it combines a couple of genres that I love. I love detective, I love supernatural, and I love horror. And it combines them all into great stuff. And Ian Rogers is a big fan of a lot of things I'm a big fan of. There are a lot of allusions to to things that I love, like some of the characters that I already mentioned, Dashiell Hammett characters, other things like the Trailer Park Boys is even mentioned in one of his stories. Alluded to, they're not mentioned, but they're alluded to, and I caught it. But SuperNOIRtural Tales is the beginning of this Blackland series. Now there's another novel that just came out through Cemetery Dance, and it's called Sycamore. And this is where it was neck and neck. How do I choose? How do I choose? Sycamore is the first novel of the Blackland series, starring Felix Wren. It's available from Cemetery Dance right now. And great Ben Baldwin cover artwork. It looks so good. But this is a novel, and it did a fabulous job with the novel. It's a great novel. And it's hard for me to say that this or this is better. It's hard to say. But I read this first. It was my introduction to the character in the world. Maybe that's part of it. And maybe there's another series that I love called the Repairman Jack series by F. Paul Wilson. And it's 15, something like that, 15 novels, and I loved every one of them. The Tomb, the first book in that series, is probably my second favorite novel that I've ever read. But if you're going to tell me what Repairman Jack's stuff means the most to you, I'm probably going to break out a collection called Quick Fixes. Short stories about Repairman Jack. I'm going to break that out to you. I'm going to say some of these stories are the most special to me, the most memorable things for me. And perhaps that's something that's going on here. The short stories, the boom, boom, in and out. It's just special to me. I don't know. And that's probably more me than the story or the subject matter themselves. But great stuff. Ian Rogers has become one of my favorite authors on God's green earth. Already feel like I've found an author that gets me. And he's Canadian. Eh? Anyway, I don't know if they actually say that. Do people from Toronto say eh? I don't know. But that's SuperNOIRtural Tales. It's a collection of short stories. And I believe it will be republished by Cemetery Dance pretty soon. Hopefully. Hopefully it will be. It's a great one. And guess what? I'm going to have to buy it when it is. When it's republished in any format. By any publisher. And now this one, again, the pain. Because some of my favorite authors and all that kind of stuff. And this is an author I read one book from. And there is a chance that it will be the only book I ever read by this author. No offense, but it's possible I might not read any other books by this author. And that is Mario Puzo, The Godfather. This is a book that I would not have ever read. I like the movie a lot. I love the movie. I'm not a fanatic of the movie, but I love the movie. And I probably would not have ever read this book if it wasn't for a publisher called Suntup Editions. Suntup Editions is a fine press publisher. See that tray case? That publishes expensive, fine books. This is a leather-bound version of The Godfather by Mario Puzo. It looks so good. It's illustrated. I'm going to just see if I can quickly find an illustration to show you an example of what kind of illustrations there are in here. But it's a beautiful version of what I found in 2025 to be an amazing book. And much like the Terminator, it's pretty daggum close to the movie. Now, this is a novel that a movie was based on as opposed to a novel based on a screenplay of a movie. But having watched the movie a few times and then reading this book, once again, the book is better than the movie. And the book makes the movie better. Watching the movie after reading the book, it's better. The movie's better that way. But again, what makes this book great is Mario Puzo is a great storyteller. But he also, in the book, gives a whole lot more information that helps me to understand the characters, their motivations, their problems, their roles within the family, their roles within the world. I like the characters better. I understand the characters better. I care more about the characters, And I care more about the plot itself and how it progresses in the book than I did in the movie. It's another one where characters that were just passing, were almost non-existent in the movie, briefly in, briefly out, we find out more about them, and we also find out how their story goes, how their story ends. And I love that about this book. I'm a character guy. You can take and tell me a good story about good characters in any setting, a million years into the future, 100 years into the past, 300 years into the past, the Wild West, Germany, Russia, Australia, South America, Florida, Pennsylvania, New York City, whatever. And I'm going to love it if it's a good story with good characters. And that's an example here. I'm not a guy that I just don't care about the genre so much. I don't have a problem with it. It's just not something that I seek out. But this story right here had me from the get-go to the end. And Mario Puzo wrote a book worthy of an iconic film, an iconic book. And I like the book better than I like the movie. And that probably isn't popular. I don't know. Fabulous book. And I'd say this is the best book that I read in 2024. And I read it early in the year, too. So it stuck with me. But that's The Godfather by Mario Puzo. The best book I read in 2024. Hopefully, 2025 will be as productive or better. I'll read some great books like I did in the last few years. And I'll talk to you then about it. We'll catch up in 2025. This same bat time, same bat channel. Anyway, I can think of no more lies to tell. So thank you for your time. Thank you for tuning in. I do appreciate it. And say la vie, baby. Doo-doo.